Okay, we're going to go back into Merfolk. I know it's been a while, but I just couldn't resist the itch to get back to one of my other favorite decks, or I guess you could say my one of my most consistently favorite deck, maybe my consistently most favorite deck, because interestingly enough, the red variants I've played, I think actually kind of have varied more over time. Typically, my Merfolk lists have not actually varied all that much, but this one might be an exception. Um, so, I know this probably looks like a dumpster fire at first glance, but I actually just went 4-1 in a previous league. I did not record that one, but it felt smooth and good enough that hopefully I can either replicate that result or maybe even get a 5-0. We'll see. But ultimately, I think there may be some merit to this idea. Basically, we are playing Yorion, Sky Nomad, as our companion, and of course, we only need one in the sideboard. But I really have not figured out if there are two, if there is like a two of that can be particularly useful. Uh, Until I do, I've actually found that having access to two more Yorions is actually kind of nice in really grindy matchups. It's very likely eventually this will get replaced with something else, the last final two slots. But Yorion is actually a surprisingly powerful card, so there certainly is some merit to just having access to some copies in the deck. And unlike Luris, one of the most famous companions out there, um, multiple copies of Yorion do not conflict with itself. Of course, Luris is 3 mana. Its restriction is you can't play permanents that cost more than 2. So obviously you can't put Luris both in your main deck and in your sideboard as a companion. I mean, you can't both designate it as a companion and have copies in the main deck. Yorion, of course, does not have such a restriction. Its restriction is based on the number of cards in your deck. As long as you have that, you can have one as a companion, and you can have up to 3 in your main deck as well. So, you know, um, anyway, enough about Yorion itself, other than simply to say that the thought process behind playing this is that actually Yorion synergizes with a lot of the basic good stuff that Merfolk already does. I actually did play this deck a little bit before the companion nerf, and even a little bit afterwards. And actually, before the companion nerf, it was actually, I mean, it wasn't this exact list, but before the companion nerf, actually, I was actually starting to see some pretty decent results. I mean, of course, it took a little while to find a list that made sense, but right before the companion nerf, I actually thought I was on the verge of starting to get comfortable enough with the deck where I might actually start trophying maybe even somewhat consistently. Unfortunately, that did not happen, so I didn't actually even have one 5-0 published to my knowledge. I don't think I actually got a 5-0 with the Yorion Merfolk back in the companion nerf, because I started experimenting with it right about very very close to when the nerf actually ended up happening. But I did actually experiment a little bit afterwards. My thought process initially was that the nerf actually might not have been that bad, and in some ways may have even been good, because Aether Vial makes it so that Yorion potentially can end up costing a total of 3 mana instead of 5, since we can pay 3 to put it in our hand, and then we can use Aether Vial to play it. Whereas before in the nerf, since it never was in our hand, we never could have actually played it off of put it into play off of Aether Vial. We could only cast it from mana. However, why did I abandon Yorion Merfolk after the companion nerf? Well, the answer was very simple. The answer was that I found that I was seeing Aether Vial far less consistently, which is pretty obvious given that I have to play an 80 card deck, and correspondingly, I found that I was just much more clunky on average. Now, obviously, you don't need Aether Vial to win. Obviously, if that were the case, then Merfolk would not be a viable deck. And while some people, would say, well, it isn't a viable deck, I certainly beg to differ, and I certainly hope to put up good results and make the help further make the case that is not true. Merfolk certainly is viable, maybe even very underrated. I want to hopefully show it's a very underrated deck, and always, frankly, has been a very underrated deck. Mainly because of the power of blue, actually. You know, just think about the strengths of Merfolk in general. Like, why is it that us players even think about playing Merfolk? Well, it's I'm kind of like getting sidetracked here a little bit, but I suppose now is as good a time as ever to just explain the fundamentals of why I think Merfolk is a solid deck, like why we play it, and why I played it, frankly. So basically, kind of an interesting story as to why is it that I always end up gravitating towards sort of like a mono red shell on the one end and then like a mono blue shell on the other. Well, actually, interestingly, okay. I before I was into competitive Magic, I actually, you know, back when I was a bit more of a casual player, although I would say I always tilted more competitive among my group, which was, you know, which you could say was casual, but I would say we were always kind of like some type of hybrid of casual competitive, you know, before I really started playing more online. Before, well, anyway, like if we go back far enough, what I'm trying to say is that I when earlier on when I was newer to Magic, I uh, I approached deck building. I approached my my initial decks a little differently, maybe than most people do. Actually, maybe not necessarily differently. Maybe this is how a lot of players were. But initially, I tried to make good, viable, fun, playable decks for each color. So that would be mono red, mono blue, mono black, mono white, mono green. And actually, at one point, I even wanted to have a deck for each two-color combination. You know, Simic, Rakdos, Izzet, you know, and so forth and so forth. Of course, they weren't actually called those guilds back then. That was it was actually Invasion Block that inspired me to. I mean, you know, like I started around Invasion Block, but I always had like a bunch of Invasion Block cards in my collection. So it wasn't necessarily right when I started, because right when I started was, I think, when Invasion Block had you know, was just like on the tail end of being playable in Standard. But it's rather just that since I had a lot of Invasion Block cards, you know, a lot of multicolored cards, you know, that's what also made me think about having you know, a two-color deck for each color. Um, and you know, what happened pretty quickly is that I realized that the two-color decks weren't really viable back then because well, for me at least, obviously you know, there's plentiful multicolor decks, and actually in the competitive scene, multicolor decks I think have almost consistently outperformed the monocolor decks throughout most of Magic's history. But for me, at least when I initially started, um, you know, my issue, of course, you know, I was not like I did not just gobble up like all the dual lands, for example. I was trying to build cards with my collection, but I also wasn't afraid to buy cards online. You know, if I felt it could improve my deck. But you know, I was a budget player back you know, back then, of course, and nobody. I didn't want to spend unlimited money. You know, nobody has unlimited money. Certainly not when you're like you know, like college age or so. Um, so um, basically, what you know, I know I've kind of meandered a little bit, but what happened is that since I really didn't want to like buy every single dual land back then, and in a way, you know, thank goodness I didn't, because the duels back then are not necessarily as good as the duels now. That, you know, there wasn't the Ravnica duels. Actually, the fetch lands, believe it or not, just came out. I kind of wish, actually, looking back at it, that it would have got all the allied colored fetch lands in Onslaught, which also came out roughly around the time I started playing. You know, it was Invasion, Odyssey, Onslaught, in that order. But you know, of course, the allied color fetch lands have dropped a bit because of cons. But yeah, so what happened is, you know, basically, since I wasn't really like a super sort of loaded player with like unlimited dual lands, unlimited mana fixing, the multicolor decks didn't quite pan out like the monocolor decks. You know, the monocolor decks were doing consistently a lot better back then. So what I ended up doing is I ended up trying to perfect like a strategy for mono red, mono blue, mono white, mono black, mono green. And the interesting thing is, even when I started becoming more competitive, I never actually abandoned those decks. You know, I never actually felt a compelling reason to um, to actually, uh, really like fundamentally change to a different type of deck. Except with one exception, actually, interestingly enough, and that was mono blue. And this kind of gets us to where we're at today. So originally, actually, my mono red deck was always some type of burn or sly, or I don't know if it's pronounced sly, but burn or red deck wins type deck. The original one I had was more like Jackal Pups, Fire Blast. The old the old red deck wins from way back in the day. No Ball Lightning. Believe it or not, I actually always felt that card was a bit overrated. Maybe I was missing something, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. I did like a lot of other interesting cards, but my point I'm trying to make is that yeah, originally I was actually playing like a mono blue control type deck, but I realized that actually having more aggression is actually incredibly valuable, and it's just more flexible, because I like counter spells, but the problem is playing straight control. Frankly, I think with any deck, is a little bit can be a little bit challenging because as Magic evolves and there's so many alternative ways to win, as there's so many different cards that you have to keep track of in your head and you have to deal with, it can become very daunting to try to like sort of have an answer to everything, So, what ended up happening was that I started to gravitate towards Merfolk. I actually always was aware of Merfolk because when I also started playing, there was these World Championship decks, and one of them was from Alex Borta. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I think it was like the 2000 or 2001 World's Championship. He had a Static Orb Opposition Merfolk deck, and I was always aware of Merfolk. The thing is, Static Orb Opposition, I think there was particular circumstances of that time that made that viable. And of course, that wasn't standard legal. Well, actually, I wasn't. I don't think I ever really played Merfolk in standard per se, but um, I guess there was just conditions about Static Orb and Opposition that didn't quite lend themselves to being very competitive outside of that standard environment. But the idea of playing Merfolk always intrigued me. But I think like a lot of people, it wasn't really until Lorwyn that Merfolk actually seemed like it might become a lot more universally viable. Because believe it or not, back in the back in the uh, Invasion Odyssey era, Lord of Atlantis was the only Merfolk Lord. I know that's hard to believe, and there was no Silvergill Adept. And it's amazing that that deck actually got second place in Worlds. Even though, really, it did primarily, I think, because the Static Orb Opposition lock was was well positioned, I think, and there probably that was more why the deck was seeing success back then. But uh, yeah, the Merfolk back then was like what's it called, Vidalian Merchant, 2 mana for a 1/2. When it comes into play, draw a card and discard a card. Yeah, compare that to Silvergill Adept. Yeah. Um, and Merfolk of the Pearl Trident, like literally 1 mana for a 1/1 vanilla Merfolk. We think we've got bad 1 mana options in Merfolk today. Whoa, you have no idea back then. Let me tell you. um, what else? Darting Merfolk, 2 mana for a 1/1. Pay 1, return Darting Merfolk to your hand. I mean, oh yeah, and also the deck played 2 copies of Waterfront Bouncer. That wasn't even a Merfolk back then. It's been errated recently to be a Merfolk. That wasn't a Merfolk back then. So there was 2 copies of a non-Merfolk card in a Merfolk deck. Yeah, the deck seemed like total jank. So, but it actually got second in Worlds way back then. So I was always familiar that Merfolk existed, and I think especially with when Merfolk of the Pearl Trident was printed, I like a lot of people, I started seeing the possibility of making a legit more aggro type mono blue deck. Um, and well, ever since I started trying to put together Merfolk more, I really really liked it. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that I remember it took me a while to pull the plug, though, on actually buying the cards. I think I kind of conceptually decided that I wanted to switch to Merfolk, but I think I actually just didn't play Mono Blue that much for a bit. And then eventually, when I finally decided, I think what it was there was no Modern back then, so I basically had to play Legacy. So when I finally basically could afford and actually felt like I was like I could pull the trigger on buying Force of Will, I I got into Legacy Merfolk. But so I know I meandered quite a bit, and I'm going to get back to the deck tech, but essentially, what I've kind of been doing is I've kind of been playing these monocolor type decks and really trying to perfect them, and actually, hey, if it works, don't fix it, right? It's funny that these decks, which kind of started back from when I was a much more of a budget player, actually, I was actually able to tweak and evolve, and they actually seem to be to be able to do pretty well, I might say. And in the case of this Obosh Prowess deck, it is quite overperformed actually. Um, but anyway, so back to the deck tech for this deck. Um, so where we're at basically is that I I thought to myself, okay, so I've got this issue with Aether Vial. Basically Yorion is a very powerful card, and when I saw Aether Vial, actually, I mean, having access to Yorion was actually very powerful. Playing it at end of turn is objectively a lot more powerful in a lot of situations, obviously, than playing it on your turn. Also because you can use it to save your creatures, like in response to a removal spell, you can blink your stuff, and of course, they can always, with Aether Vial on 5 and Merfolk, and with you putting it in your hand, you're not surprising anybody. But, the point is, you can, you can at least deter a removal spell, at least a sorcery speed removal spell on their turn, or like a Wrath effect, or something. You could even hold it up for a Wrath effect. But the point is, since they come into play at end of turn anyway, it's almost always just objectively better to play Merfolk at the end of turn, unless you need to like draw a card. Well, yeah, I mean almost always. It's almost always objectively correct. When we might see some other situations pop up, that are different, but yeah, the point is when you have Aether Vial, Yorion is incredibly powerful, and maybe even better after the companion nerf. But you don't always see Aether Vial, and that's the problem. When you don't see Aether Vial, the deck just feels a lot more clunky. And playing Yorion is quite difficult when you have to pay full retail price and 3 mana on top of it, especially in a deck like Merfolk, which, I know I referred to it as sort of an aggro deck earlier, but suffice it to say, I think we all know by now, Merfolk is really more of a mid-range deck, and obviously that's kind of how the deck gravitated towards. Like I think all of us initially start with Merfolk as like in a very aggressive deck with like 4 to 8 1-drops and like maxing out on lords and trying to go for like quick kills. But well, anyways, and some of us still may do that and still may find success. But I found success in basically just having access to pretty efficiently costed creatures. 2 mana for a 2/1 draw card, and lords. Trickster. All of these cards are pretty. They're not like overpowered, but they're all pretty fairly priced. Just basically having access to reasonably quick kills and also disruption. Basically sort of like mono blue Jund was the way to go. But so anyway, back to Aether Vial. So, and I'm sure a lot of you were probably thinking this right from the beginning, and it's taken a long time through my rant to finally get to it, but. Yes, your eyes are not deceiving you, and this is not a mistake. Serum Powder is in fact in the deck, and okay, it was actually very surprisingly good in the last league I 4-1 with. I 4-1 with this deck. We'll see if it continues to surprise, but Serum Powder, okay. This allows me to find Aether Vial a lot more consistently. It actually came up in a conversation I had with an opponent when I was playing Obosh Prowess. I don't think this one was recorded, but I guess we'll see. It's been a while. If so, it'll probably get uploaded in the not too distant future. And maybe I'll remind myself of when exactly this conversation occurred, if it was recorded. But I remember one player asked me like, oh no, actually one player was playing Merfolk, and I was like, oh man, you want to make Merfolk work too? That's great. I do too. Like I love the idea, but I remember saying like, yeah, the problem is I just don't see Aether Vial consistently enough. And he was like, yeah, or he or she was like, yeah, actually that's the same issue I've been having. Like, Yorion is great, but yeah, not seeing Aether Vial consistently is definitely an issue. And then I'm like, yeah, if only there was a way we could like somehow fix that problem. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I said, well, actually, I think I jokingly kind of said, well, I suppose we could always play Serum Powder, like LOL. Um, and I think, he or she was like, yeah, LOL. And then I thought for a second, wait a minute. Maybe that's not completely crazy. I mean, okay, it is kind of crazy, but maybe it's crazy and it actually might not be bad. So, I actually said, yeah, like actually, maybe Serum Powder might actually not be bad. And the opponent was like, you know, maybe so. Uh, I think the opponent said they might try to try it. I'm not sure. I can't remember the opponent's username. I'm not sure if they did really test it much, or how much magic they've been able to jam since then. I haven't necessarily seen Serum Powder Merfolk making the round since then, so I'm not exactly sure. But I finally am in a. I finally feel like I'm settled enough in the Obosh Prowess deck that I want to get back to trying to make Merfolk work in this meta, and Serum Powder essentially is trying to fix that fundamental problem of not seeing Aether Vial as consistently. And another nice thing I noticed is that it also enables me, like another problem with Yorion Merfolk that I was having was that cards like Relic of Progenitus, like I need to mulligan to this against Dredge. Either that or like load my deck with more graveyard hate. That was kind of an issue too, because with 80 cards, again, you don't see it as consistently. But with Serum Powder, I've actually been noticing that when I want to see a specific sideboard card, like some matchups you need to see Deprive, some matchups you need to see Relic of Progenitus. Some, even though it's in the main deck, some decks you need to see Chalice of the Void. Like Serum Visions just basically allows you to mulligan to these cards far more consistently. In fact, I've been feeling, and I could be wrong about this, but I've been feeling that with Serum Powder, I may even be seeing access to specific cards that I want to see when I mulligan to them even more consistently, despite the fact that my deck is 80 cards, than when it was 60. Now, I haven't worked out the exact math. That might not be correct, but Serum Powder definitely seems to correct most of the consistency issues that I'm having moving to 80 cards. It's really, really been surprisingly overperforming. Also, the extra mana has been surprisingly not irrelevant. So even when I draw it, it's really surprising. First of all, with Smuggler's Copter, a lot of times I can loot it away if I draw it, as opposed to use its powder effect. But even so, even if not, with 4 copies of Faerie Conclave and 4 copies of Mutavault, the usual man-land package I've always loved to play, actually having access to more mana helps be able to activate the man lands while also playing other spells. So it still helps there. And I'm upping to 4 Castle Vantresses, in addition to the Faerie Conclave, since we do have to play more lands, being 80 cards. And Castle Vantress is also incredibly mana hungry, and Serum Visions also helps use Castle Vantress's ability more comfortably. So yeah, Serum Visions actually, even just as a overcosted mana rock, is actually not useless, and surprisingly, pretty decent, believe it or not, I've been finding so far. Um, I mean, the mana base is pretty straightforward. I could play some Horizon lands, but I've kind of been gravitating away from them even in 60 card decks. And it's basically just because, being more of a mid-range deck, I just really don't like the cumulative effect of having to rack up taking a lot of damage off of the Horizon lands until I crack them. So I kind of prefer cards like Castle Vantress and Faerie Conclave, which I can tap them as many times as I want without taking damage, and they still have use later in the game. Um, and also, like I said before, Faerie Conclave is nice to pressure planeswalkers, and sometimes the extra evasion is pretty sweet too. We are, of course, a little extra vulnerable to Plague Engineer and Aiming Fairy, because they also tag Brazen Borrower, which we all know is a pretty solid card, especially when we need to fill out the rest of our deck with 80 cards. I think having Brazen Borrower in the main deck is certainly not a bad call. Again, if it's particularly bad, we can always loot it with Smuggler's Copter. Master of Waves. This is another reason why I'm kind of gravitating towards Yorion instead of like Lurrus as a companion, if I want to play a companion at all for that matter. But the reason why I kind of feel like right now, at least specifically, Yorion Merfolk might be better positioned than Lurrus Merfolk is that we have access to Master of Waves. Anybody who knows me knows that, believe it or not, I'm not actually the biggest fan of Master of Waves in the abstract. I think that it's not that it's a bad card, and it's not even that it's necessarily a win more card, like a lot of the criticism of it is. But it's just that well, it's just a bit more clunky, and I just find that it's well, it plays into more of the mid-range aspect of the deck, which is not necessarily a problem, but let's just say it's in my experience it's been swingy. When it's good, it's very good. When it's bad, it's very bad. And I've just kind of liked the deck being more even overall in the past, but nowadays I think Master of Waves is a must, either in the main deck or the sideboard. Here I'm opting to play it in the main deck because I think out of all the cards in the sideboard, this is definitely the most main deckable. And the reason why is that Prowess is everywhere, including my own Prowess deck, which is taking off more in popularity, the Obosh Prowess deck. And actually, really how good Master of Waves against Red is something I had to confront against the first and only time I actually played against a fellow YouTuber. And actually, you know, like I would say one of the masters of of content creation in general, and certainly you know, a Merfolk master, if not the Merfolk master. Oh, okay, you know, the Merfolk master, Nikachu. I did play him. You know, believe it or not, I only bumped into him one time so far in Magic Online. He did actually. It was close, but he did actually win. Win a match 2-1, and largely that was because of Master of Waves. You know, I was actually, I remember, I think I was probably one spell, I think, away from top decking like some type of burn spell, but that didn't happen. But the point is that wasn't where I wanted to be in that matchup with Prowess, where I was playing towards trying to top deck burn spells to finish off the opponent instead of trying to outgrind the opponent with value, which I've generally found is a more consistent way to win with Obosh Prowess. And the reason why is that Master of Waves, you know, all you have to do is find a good spot with enough devotion on the battlefield where you can just try to stick it. And then, you know, the pro red, it can be kind of hard to get around, especially if you don't have Bone Crusher Giant, which also is always susceptible to getting Force of Negation. You know, but also just the endless wave of tokens, you know, which without Ratchet Armor, Kozilek's Return, you know, maybe that's something to consider about those cards. You know, it can be a little bit challenging to deal with. Yeah, it kind of puts you in a spot where it's just one of the few cards, actually, that kind of instantaneously stabilizes, makes it almost impossible to attack, and is very difficult to deal with for a Prowess deck. And I really had to respect it. It instantly dominated the board, basically, is what happened. So I instantly have to switch gears. If I'm playing Prowess, I instantly have to switch gears and try to win with burn spells, which is not ideal because obviously Prowess is not a burn deck, and its burn spells are typically not as powerful, and it's not really geared up to try to finish the game purely with burn, which it can. But you know, like, I'd much rather be playing. Let's put it this way: if my opponent's on Master of Waves, I'd much rather be playing burn than Prowess because yeah, burning out the opponent is where you need to be if the opponent sticks a Master of Waves. But anyway, Dismember, always a solid card. Force of Negation, you know, very powerful card. I think also one of the draws to playing Merfolk nowadays. One of the few decks that can reliably support Force of Negation. And Chalice of the Void. You know, I like the other cards. This is really just the most main deckable card, I think. Main deckable sideboard card, and yeah, I don't know what else to say other than that. Since we're playing Yorion, you know, I don't really feel I can only get away with playing 2 Chalices of the Voids in the sideboard. So I do want to have access to 3 or 4 in the main deck or the sideboard. So basically, since I have to make room for Yorion, I felt like, well, you know, I might as well move it to the main deck. Again, we can always loot it away with Smuggler's Copter, or if it's on top of our library, you know, we can put it on the bottom with Castle Vantress. Just you know, I don't know, like it's in a way, depending on the meta, it could be the weakest link, but it could also be the strongest link. It's also very good against Prowess. At the end of the day, I mean, you know, I've been liking it. It also when it's bad, it doesn't show up as much, being an 80 card, you know, deck. I don't know what to say. It just since the deck basically has no 1-drops anyway, it's just kind of a nice value card. Let's put it that way. At worst, it usually shuts off a couple cards from the opponent, but at best, it can be a total lockout card. You know, it is what it is. I personally have always found that it's always been at least decent main decking it, particularly when you have like no non-Aether Vial 1-drops. You know, but anyway, let's run this through a league. and see how this goes. Deprive, of course, and Relic of Progenitus need no explanation. And Aether Gust. I think just in this environment, this is just one of the biggest strengths of blue. So I don't know what else to say. Just so flexible. I think it's been well documented, the strengths of this card. So, anyway, I think I have rambled enough. This is the first 30-minute deck tech. Oh my goodness. I'm almost wondering if I should just record another deck tech. But I feel like a little bit of my explanation, which please feel free to ask me in the comment section if something about the history of like how these decks evolved, and sort of like, I'm not afraid to splash another color, by the way, but it's just because since I started off monocolor, I guess it's just I don't know, I just have had more success with monocolor. When I splash another color, it just doesn't usually seem to work out as well, and I guess maybe just I've had so much experience playing monocolor decks for such a long time. And by the way, I do actually have a mono black, mono white, and mono green deck. I just haven't really played them for a long time because it's very hard to have to keep 5 decks competitive. But oh, and by the way, their mono black Phyrexian Obliterator. It used to be called. It used to be well, I'm not sure if this word is censored on YouTube or not, but it used to be Sue Black, for lack of a better term, and but when Phyrexian Obliterator came out, it's just such an unbelievably dominating mid-range card. Anyway, so the mono black deck is mono black Obliterator. The mono white deck is actually, in Legacy, it was mono white Stoneblade essentially, or Cawblade. I actually played Squadron Hawk. And the modern deck was actually like Cawblade without Stoneforge Mystic. I played Steel Shaper's Gift. Yeah, definitely the weakest of my monocolor decks, but I've actually really been wanting to try mono white Stoneblade again. Since Stoneforge Mystic has been unbanned. Maybe eventually I will be able to get around to that. Could be viable, might not be, who knows. Deck actually, I think I built a very, very strong mid-range version that was starting to feel like I could outgrind almost anything. I remember at one point that mono white Stoneblade deck without Stoneforge Mystic, but before Stoneforge Mystic was unbanned, with Steel Shaper's Gift to tutor for the equipment. It felt actually surprisingly very good and grindy, but it just had like basically 0 game against combo. It was so miserable. It was actually okay against control and aggro. It could also struggle against control sometimes too. It's like Batterskull, I remember. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I've rambled on for enough. And the mono green deck, by the way, was mono green Infect, which probably was the deck most consistently prone to having me splash another color from time to time, like either black or blue. But believe it or not, even mono green Infect, I probably most consistently played. Even Infect, I probably most consistently played it as mono green rather than with a splash. Although I certainly have played a fair bit of the blue and black splash with Infect as well. None of which is on Magic Online. Most of that was before I got into Magic Online. But anyway, I've rambled on enough. I apologize if this went on for too long. Let me know in the comments section if I missed anything wasn't clear in this long rant. If I missed discussing any card, I don't think I did. I think I've discussed basically everything, and anything I haven't discussed. Like Merfolk Trickster, for example. I think either I've discussed it in the past or it's pretty universally known why the card gets played. So just let me know. I'll be happy to try to help explain as best as I can. But yeah. All right, let's see how this goes.